Hello, Glitter Witches, and welcome back to the channel. Today, I wanted to start a new series. It is going to be called Bewitching the Saints. What is Bewitching the Saints? I have been wanting to do a series about canonized saints and folk saints. And the reason I wanted to do this is because I work with saints in my witchcraft practice, and it seems to be a point of intrigue for a lot of witches. I did talk about how Christianity influences my witchcraft in a previous video on my channel. I'll try to put it somewhere so you guys can find it. This isn't really what this series is going to be about. What I want to do is highlight different saints, canonized and folk saints. I want to give you information about the saint, how they became a saint, their story, what they're the patron saint of, and then actually show you how to work with them, their feast days, give you all the information you may need. And the reason I wanted to do this is I think more witches should get in touch with this power. I have found it very useful in a lot of aspects of my life. As you know, I work with Saint Expedite a lot and Saint Barbara, and they cross lines not just in Catholicism, but also in Hoodoo tradition. So I think it can be a very useful practice to add into your witchcraft. So the plan for the series is to do a video for each saint. Now, there are a lot of saints, canonized saints and folk saints, like a huge amount, thousands of saints. So we're not going to tackle the whole of them. I want to highlight the ones that I've worked with and ones that I think would be easily digestible for witches who haven't worked with saints before. So what we're going to do in this series is make a video for each saint, and we're going to go over all of that information. But before we get into the saints, I kind of wanted to explain the differences between what a canonized saint is and what a folk saint is, and kind of highlight what that process is like before we actually start the series. So the first thing that I want to talk about is a canonization process. Now, if you're Catholic, you may know this information, maybe you don't. I did not grow up Catholic. I grew up Southern Baptist, so the whole idea of saints is new to me, and I was actually introduced to it through witchcraft and content creators on Instagram. So I don't come from a Catholic background, so I'm not invested in that way. So I had to kind of do my own research, and through witchcraft, which then led me to research hoodoo and incorporate certain aspects of the hoodoo practice into my witchcraft practice. I know that they work a lot with saints, folk and canonized. So I wanted to start off by talking about the canonization process and what leads a saint to actually become a saint. Canonization is a 5-step process that an individual goes through in order to become a saint. Once they've been officially canonized, then they are recognized by the Roman Catholic Church as an official saint. Let's go through those 5 steps to see exactly what an individual has to do in order to become a saint. The first step in the canonization process is an individual that's being put up for sainthood has to have passed away. And typically there's a 5-year waiting period in between the time the person has passed away to the time they're nominated for sainthood. Now, that can be waived by the Pope, like when Mother Teresa died. She was only dead for 2 years before she went through the canonization process, to which we now know as Saint Teresa. Modern day saints like Mother Teresa typically do wait about 5 years, in her case 2 years, to be canonized, but there are other saints that have been passed away for thousands of years that have waited to be canonized, like Saint Bede, the theologian who died in 734 and waited 1164 years before he was canonized. The reason for the 5-year waiting period is to let emotions calm down from the person's passing in order to evaluate the person's life and case objectively. Once the 5 years are up or a waiver has been granted, the bishop of the diocese in which the person died can then open up an investigation into that person's life to see if they lived a significant holy life in order to continue on through this process. Other religious groups can also petition the diocese to open up an investigation into an individual. Evidence is gathered on the person's life and their deeds, including witness testimonies. If there is sufficient evidence, then the bishop asks a congregation of causes for saints for a recommendation to the Pope of Saints permission to open up the case. Once the case is accepted and open, that individual can then be called a servant of God. The third step is to show a life of heroic virtue. The Congregation of Causes for Saints then scrutinizes the individual's holiness and looks at all aspects of their life. If the case is then approved, it's then sent to the Pope. If the Pope decides that the individual lived a life of heroic virtue, then the person can be called venerable. Step 4 is verified miracles. Now, to reach the next stage of beatification, a miracle must be attributed to prayers made to the individual after their death. The prayers being granted are seen as miracles because it's an indication that that individual is in heaven and therefore able to intercede with God on others' behalf. Incidences need to be verified with evidence before they can be called miracles. There was one case with John Paul II in which the Vatican examined medical evidence of allegedly a nun being cured of Parkinson's disease. Saint Marie, who had Parkinson's disease, and her nuns prayed for the intercession of Pope John Paul II to heal her, and she was healed. She was cured with no medical intervention and no other explanation other than the intercession of Pope John Paul II. After beatification, the individual is then granted the title blessed. There is one exception to this miracle requirement. If someone is a martyr and died for their faith, then they can be beatified without any verified miracles. The last and final stage is the canonization stage. Now, in order for an individual to be canonized, they need a second miracle after they've been beatified. Martyrs, again, only need one miracle in order to be canonized. The second miracle for John Paul, who we talked about in the fourth stage, was a miraculous recovery of a Costa Rican woman, Flora Beth Mora, I believe is her name, who had a severe brain illness, who was miraculously healed with no medical intervention or any other sort of understanding other than her asking for his intercession with her illness. There are incidences like Pope Francis who can waive the second miracle need if there is a lot of outpouring of miracles being attributed to an individual who has already been beatified. Once all this has happened, there's a ceremony that takes place to officially canonize the individual, in which a huge mass is then put together. The Pope reads about the life of the individual and chants a prayer in Latin to officially canonize them into sainthood. Now it's time to talk about folk saints, and there is not a whole long process that I'm going to have to go through. Folk saints are saints that are not canonized. They are oftentimes referred to as populist saints because they come from all different backgrounds and spiritualities based on what they did when they were alive, and then they become a patron saint of that situation or that need. A lot of folk saints, according to official doctrine, would be called sinners or evil, but for people who walk a different path or are not indoctrinated by Catholicism or Christianity, see them as powerhouses that can help work directly with God to intercede on their behalf. Now, when we're talking about folk saints, there is somewhat of an intercession between canonized saints and folk saints, in the sense that in pre-Christian times, Abrahamic traditions would see prophets that would then be turned into what we would now be called as saints. I think a lot of the reservation from most witches of working with saints, particularly canonized saints, is indoctrinating your practice with Christianity or bringing an Abrahamic God into your witchcraft. I'm just of the belief that where there is power, there is power. And for me personally, I kind of see it as blasphemy, and that feels powerful to me based on my own indoctrination as a child. I found ways to take what I was meant to believe and switched it to work for what I need and what I resonate with now. And through this series, I want to show you how I've done that, and also how it feels perfect and how it works and how witches can actually work with these saints. And that is the intro video. That is the canonization process. That's a little bit about folk saints. Now, I did want to say that there's always exceptions to any of these rules, and we will go over those with the saints that it is pertinent for. So I hope you guys will tune in for this series. I'm not going to have a schedule. I'm just going to kind of post them when I record them because, as I'm sure you could tell by this video, it takes a lot of editing. It's a lot of information, and particularly with the intro, I wanted to make sure that I get the process and all the steps correct to give you kind of a general consensus of what the difference between the two is. So thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye, Glitter Witches.